Dick Greminger to thank for that, and our meeting here at the Oris every time for our speaker series. So let's give it up for Dick Greminger. So, how many of you are members? I ask this every time. Quite a few. Very good. Your membership gets you a lot of things. It gets you free admission to our speaker series here. If you just walked in from the Oris and didn't know what was going on, it is a fundraiser for us. So please check in at the door sometime this evening and let us know about you. We've got a few things going on. We've always talked about being a member and what it does for you. Well, it gives you unlimited visits to our speaker series. It gives you unlimited visits to the museum, and it also gives you discounts in our gift shop. Great time of year to visit our gift shop. There's a lot of things there. We have a lot of STEM items in our gift shop, as well as puzzles. And I think we've delivered a nice flyer on our puzzles. Makes a great Christmas gift. Grandkids love it, or even, anyone had a wedding or something throughout the year, or some kind of special event. You had a neat photo. Have a puzzle made of it. It's a great keepsake for them and a great Christmas present. So we've got that going on. A few upcoming events coming up. Our third trolley ride is planned for Friday, December 19th, and we'll take a ride through the countryside and visit about 5 churches. They're all dressed up for the holidays, including the Lutheran Heritage Museum, where they have 50, I'm not kidding you, they've got 50 Christmas trees there to see, as well as we'll visit the Shrine of the Miraculous Medal as well. We talked about unique Christmas gifts. We hope you take advantage of that. Visit our gift shop sometime in the next couple of weeks or so before Christmas. We just unveiled a new exhibit at the museum, and it gives kind of a spirited look at St. Genevieve's past. Stills. Copper Still is there in the corner with a kind of neat story, so it's one of our new exhibits there. Our raffle is going strong. If you came in the front door, we've got opportunity for you to win blues tickets and a night stay at the Drury Inn in St. Louis, dinner and a night stay at the Audubon here in St. Genevieve, or a third prize, a VIP tour of the museum. So if you haven't gotten, again, your Christmas shopping done, you could win that. Be a great gift for someone in your family. We've got also on the flyer, which hopefully you've gotten, Charles Duckworth wrote a fantastic book on the Missouri-Illinois Railroad, and it is so comprehensive. And if you have any train fan in your family, or if you are one, you want to avail yourself of this book. And he's also going to be down on December 14th for a book signing. So that would make a great gift too, to add to your library or someone you know. So that'll be really neat. Missouri-Illinois Railroad. Fantastic. Coming up on our speaker series, we'll kick off our speaker series in the new year with Bill Holst, and he will delve into the early history of northern St. Genevieve County. So that'll be interesting. His program will be on January 14th. Then on the 28th of January, Barney Bradshaw will talk about the Great Fire of 1849, and this was said to be the largest and most destructive fire in St. Louis, so that's got quite an interesting story too. But tonight, we are pleased to welcome Tom Greminger. Tom has a variety of interests. He even volunteers his time to organize the museum artifacts down in the basement, where he sees all the secrets down there. So tonight he's going to talk about a topic that he's been researching for some time, along with his buddy back there, Bob Mueller, and one-room schoolhouses in St. Genevieve County, and brought to you by our sponsor, HSV Advisors in St. Genevieve. Give it up for HSV. We try and do at least 2 speaker series a month. I think there's only been a month or 2 where we only had 1 or so. But if you have something that you'd like to hear in the speaker series, we'd love to hear about it. If you yourself are not an expert on the topic, we'll certainly find someone who might be. So just let us know what that is. Without further ado, Tom Greminger.
Okay. Well, let me get the mic on now that I rang the bell. Okay. Is that on now? Is everybody okay? Everybody can hear me? That bell was the original school bell from Hogemeller School around Weingarten. And that was the teacher there for many, many years was a guy by the name of Joseph Hogemeller. And we also at the museum have his desk, his teacher's desk, which was a high-leg desk that the top folded up. So yeah, we've accumulated some. I don't know what's. We can get rid of the. Am I standing the wrong way or whatever? Anyway, yeah, we have several things that's the museum has got over the years from some of these one-room schoolhouses and so forth. And tonight we're going to talk about not only one-room schoolhouses, but public education in St. Genevieve County. Now, before I get started, and I think Dick is doing something with the sound system, so, okay. Keep in mind that in St. Genevieve County there was religious education many years before public education was really known in St. Genevieve County. So I'm not going to talk about any of those schools or any of those educational systems tonight. We're going to talk strictly about public schools or public education in St. Genevieve County. And to start off, we'll talk about this one, which is kind of the centerpiece of one-room schoolhouses in St. Gen County, in that it has been upkeep. This building was in operation since 1887, I believe, is when it was originally built and put into operation. And a guy by the name of Pershing Karen, and I don't know if Pershing's here. Is he? Okay, there he is right there. And I believe Pershing told me that the year that this closed down in 1947, I believe, you were a 7th or an 8th grader?
8th grade.
You were in the 8th grade, okay, in 1947. And of course, if you do the math and so forth, that makes Pershing about what, 92, 93?
93.
93. He's been keeping this building in perfect shape all those years, and we'll talk a little bit later about Lawrenceston School. But it's sitting out there next to Lawrenceston Church that you can see in the background, and he's kept it painted. The inside has been refurbished back to an original 18th century classroom, and we'll talk more about this a little bit later. But let's start off talking about public education in St. Genevieve County. And before there was actually state or tax supported schools in St. Genevieve County, there is what I refer to, and before I forget, the original list, which you're going to get a copy of later on this evening, was compiled by Bob Mueller. And I was coming out of church on one Sunday at Lawrenceston, and I said to Bernadette, I said, boy, Pershing sure keeps that building in great shape. And I said, I wonder how many more one-room schoolhouses there are like that in St. Gen. And I already knew of several, but not near. And like 2 nights later, I was at a Civil War meeting with Bob, and I said something to him, and I said, hey, Bob, where would I start? And he said, hey, I'll email you what I've got so far. And he had been working on this list for years. Well, he emailed it to me, and it ends up being like 60-something different schools in St. Genevieve County. One-room schools are the beginning of public education in St. Genevieve County. And of course, the original one-room schoolhouses in St. Gen, they weren't all considered public schools or state-supported or locally supported schools. These were what we refer to as a subscription school. And this is where several families, or maybe just one family, they were tuition operated. And probably one of the earliest that we know about, and I'm not going to get into detail on a lot of these because you could spend a whole speaker series just talking about, just like the academy. You could have a whole evening talking nothing about the academy, but this was one of the earliest subscription schools. In other words, the parents, some benefactor would pay for a student to attend the academy. And this was like in 1808 is when, well, I think the first classes was actually in 1810, I believe. But anyway, 1808, 1810, this was one of the first ones in St. Genevieve County that was public. It was not associated with any religious organization, public education. Another one that was in the county, 1815 to 1830, would have been another one, and this was a fun one to find out about. Out on the Perry County Highway Z, all you locals that know where some of these places are, right on the Perry County, St. Genevieve County Highway Z, Mineth, out in that area, there was a school out there which was founded by a Dr. Henrik from Switzerland that come over and established another academy out there in the boonies. And it was known as, and maybe in Switzerland where he came from, where he was a professor, maybe it has a different meaning in Switzerland, but the academy was known as the Asylum. Now, the Asylum at one time we have found newspaper articles, and of course, Bob, for those of you that don't realize this, the local newspaper, the article in the newspaper each week where it gives what happened 100 years ago, what happened 75 years ago. Bob's the one that writes that, and he researches all these old newspapers and will pull out some item from each edition and code it, and that's where continuously, every so often I'll get an email from Bob saying, hey, found this in 1850 edition of the Herald or the Fair Play, where it's something about some of these schools in St. Genevieve County. But the Asylum, we'll talk a little bit more about the Asylum later, but just at this point, I would say that the Asylum, in one of the newspaper articles that I've read, I think at one point the Asylum had like 47, and these were older boys. These were like high school boys. These were not grade school kids, but it was all boys. 46 of them on one of the articles that was there at the Asylum. And needless to say, from the Asylum, which we'll talk about a little bit later, the Asylum was very well known for advanced studies. And from the Asylum, there was like 4 or 5 U.S. senators that actually attended the Asylum out in Mineth. A couple of them from Missouri. I think there was one from Iowa, a U.S. senator, along with several other state and local positions. You know, U.S. senator, you know, that's pretty good. But coming from the boonies in Ozor, St. Genevieve County. And needless to say, today, I'm sure we have a lot of U.S. senators that also attended the Asylum, but it wasn't that one. The Asylum, as I said, 1815 to 1830. From there, we'll back up a little bit. And I have a hard time reading. My eyes are going bad, so I'm kind of looking at dates and stuff that I find a little bit hard to remember. But anyway, back in that same period of time, the original one-room schoolhouses in St. Genevieve, the city of St. Gen, and of course, I got to include the city of St. John's schools in the county. So we're going to talk about the city of St. John's schools at first. One of the first known records are anything that we could find about early education in St. Genevieve, the city of St. Genevieve, was that they held classes, and these were different, here again, subscription schools. The teacher was paid for by parents or whatever, and believe it or not, some of the first public education was held in the upstairs of the old brick. And from the old brick, they moved down in 1824, I believe it is, yep. They moved down to on, and you got to think about this. This is a real old photo. This is South Gabourey Street that you see running across the screen, and 2nd Street, okay? Right on the corner, well, for those of you that know where the Foundation's office is, the Foundation for Restoration, it's right across the street from this house, which was, I think, known as the Butcher House. Butcher House. And I think some of you may know Mary Giesler, who lives in that house. But classes was held in that house, and that's when the actual state of Missouri actually said that, okay, we're going to start farming public schools and so forth. In about 1824, that particular house, they outgrew that particular, and here again, I'm sure it was a one-room schoolhouse. From there, the school board, they didn't call it school board back then, but the board of trustees elected to build what we all know today as First School over on Washington Street. And that was they actually built that, and I think that was actually put into operation in 1859. And that school wasn't known as First School. It was known by a couple different names. Lincoln and Douglas was, through the years, that particular building, and now I think it's vacant right now, but there's been different people in there. Union, it was a Union Hall for a while at Mississippi Lime. It's been a number of things, and eventually the number of students in St. John, public students, and we'll talk about the finance and so forth a little bit later. But after 1859, that school became crowded, and they built the new 3-story brick building over on the corner of Market and 2nd Street, right across 2nd Street from the Lutheran Church here in town. And I grew up 2 houses down 2nd Street, and that was my playground, was the school playground with all of the swings and the merry-go-round and so forth. But that building was actually built by the school district that was the St. Genevieve School District. In 1878, I believe, is when that school was put into operation and remained in operation until they moved up on the hill and built the, in 1936, I think they built the, this was not only 8th grade through 8 grades, but it was also a high school at one point. And was actually in operation until they built what now is the middle school, was the new high school that they built along about 1936 up on the hill. Anyway, and long story short, there was also the first kindergarten in St. Genevieve. I thought I was in the first kindergarten, the Fleur-de-Lis kindergarten, in 1952, but come to find out, Bob found an article, and way back in the 1800s, there was a kindergarten that actually taught basically numbers and letters and music in the basement of that building. There was actually a paid-for kindergarten. Wasn't tax supported. It was like early childhood or preschool is today. But that was where the first kindergarten was. Okay, moving on after that, getting back to a little bit of history about school districts in St. Genevieve. I'm backing up a little bit. 1824. I got to read my notes, make sure I'm giving you the right dates. 1824 was when they used the old brick. 1846 is when they moved over to on South Gabourey. 1859, like I said, was the first school, and we've already looked at all that. So I can go on to a little bit about how state schools or one-room schools were set up in the state of Missouri. Of course, the state of Missouri only became a state in 1821. About 3 or 4 years later, the state decides that they needed a Department of Education. And the guy that they brought in to set up the Missouri State Education Department was none other than Dr. Hedrick, who was the headmaster or the guy that found the asylum in St. Genevieve. They brought him, and he basically wrote the first State Department of Education rules and regulations for the state of Missouri, which is kind of neat when you think about it, that the first, and I don't know, what do they call the director of schools and some of you teachers, the guy in Jeff City now, is it the Secretary of Education or in the state of Missouri? Anyway, the first one that actually wrote the rules and regulations of how the state education system would be set up was Dr. Hedrick from the asylum. So just a little bit of background on that. And that was along about 1833 is when Dr. Hedrick and two other people, it was three administrators or trustees that set that up for the state of Missouri. And at that point, they were deciding on, well, how would we fund the state of Missouri, the schools, all these rural schools that up to that point were basically subscription schools. They were paid for by tuition and so forth. How are we going to set this up? Well, Hedrick and the people that was back in 1824, 1830s and through there, actually set it up so that out of every section of public land in the state of Missouri, okay, every section, which is a geographic measurement of property, out of every section, 1/16 of every section of public land in the state of Missouri would be set aside for the funding of the public school system. Now, if you figure that out in terms of acres, that ends up being 40 acres. So 40 acres of public land out of each section of land in the county was set aside to pay for public schools. And as I said, it's 40 acres is what that boils down to. And that would be from that 40 acres, if it was rented out to farmers, it would be from the rent, or it would be from the sale of those 40 acres to local landowners. But that money would be used to set up all these separate schools. Now, keep in mind that all of these one-room schoolhouses, and I'm going to give you a list of them, and the list that Bob basically come up with, and we've been adding to, there's still I'm sure there's a few of them that we've missed, but so far we've got about 71 of them on the roll as a separate school district. Now, not a separate school in a district, but a separate district. Each school district, each of these little one-room schoolhouses all over the county had a board of trustees, a 3-man board of trustees that controlled the hiring of the teacher, the funding of the school, and how it would be set up. And this got to, over the years, eventually, like it is today, it eventually ends up being supported by your property tax in the school district that it ends up in. Anyway, we come up with about, out of the 71 schools that we have on our list, and some of those were all subscription schools. Some of these separate school districts had different names. From time to time, they would change the name of the school. So this got a little bit confusing as far as some of these names of schools. And I'm going to give you a list later on of all 70-something locations that we found. And if you're really interested, we have got the GPS location of exactly where these schools were located. And a lot of them are being lived in still today. I'm going to say roughly a dozen of these original 60 public school districts. The school that was in that district, there's somebody living in it now. Now they've been added on to, sided over, re-roofed, but there's still people living in them today. We've come up and with our research, we've come up and please, before you leave tonight, come up and look at, this is pictures of about 15 of those schools throughout the county that some of them are original pictures of what it looked like when it was in operation. Some of them after it became a school district or it was taken out of commission. And some of them are pictures of what it looks like today. And we'll look at some of those a little bit later as far as school districts. But anyway, over the years, the school districts, the state, as I said, about 1835 is when they actually kicked in this system. And the first, other than a one-room or any rooms in St. Genevieve City, the first one-room, or in this case, it was a big room, but the first one-room school district out in the county was at Zell. And this is what that building looked like. And to give you some idea of where that was, and of course it's leveled, it's the cemetery in Zell, and you all know where Zell General Store, Zell Cave, which the building's about ready to collapse, it's sitting right to the right, and the church, St. Joseph's Church, and the cemetery is sitting right off to the left of that building. So it's basically in the parking lot is where that building was. That was the first one-room schoolhouse that was outside, that was considered a state school, that was outside the city limits of St. Genevieve. Okay, it was Zell School. And that's what it looked like. And interesting enough, we have over the years, every year, the different school districts are the count, well, backing up a little bit, all of these separate school districts in the county reported to a county superintendent of schools. And he was over control of all 60-something school districts, and he was hired by and reported to the county judges. Back then, they were called judges. Today, we call them county commissioners. Okay? So he was actually employed as the county superintendent of schools, and he was over all 60-something schools. Now, keep in mind, not all of these one-room schoolhouses were in operation. When I say 60, not all of them were in operation at the same time. the golden age of one-room schoolhouses really, by the way, Zell, this school building, was originally the first year, or when it started operation, was in 1847. So the golden age of one-room schoolhouses in St. Genevieve County was basically between 1850 and 1950. So about 100 years of where you had all these separate districts in the county of St. Genevieve. Now over the years, there's been several reorganizations to where the last big reorganization, well, 1939, they reorganized all 50-something schools that were in operation at that point, school districts. They reorganized about 50 of them, 40-something, about 50, into 5 school districts in St. Genevieve County. And the biggie really came in 1952 when they reorganized all of the 5 into just 2 school districts. And one of them was Kaufman, and the Kaufman School District, and then St. Gen R2 pulled them all in. Now, I asked Steph this evening, I said, what was the number one reason why all of these rural schools shut down? And why were they reorganized? What was the number one thing that caused all these schools to shut down? Well, it was really school buses. School buses is what caused the reorganizations and why all these separate school districts, and that kind of sounds funny, but blame it on the school buses. You know, if your school shut down, it was because now they were able to transport these schools or these kids into 5 school districts, and then, you know, from 50 to 5, and then from 5 just to the 2. And today, of course, we've got our 2 school district. Kaufman School District was only split up, I think it was in the 1980s, when part of Kaufman School District went to St. Francis County or Farmington, and part of it stayed with the R2 School District in St. Jim. And of course, today we just got R2. And there's several other school districts today that come into St. Genevieve County, but they're not, you know, St. Genevieve County R2. And so that's a whole nother story of how, you know, all that goes astray from time to time.
Hey, Tom.
Sir?
Where's the St. Mary's District?
St. Mary's District, I think and you're going to get a sheet that's going to tell when St. Mary's and Bloomsdale, when they become a school district. If I remember rightly, I want to say that St. Mary's Public School District was like 1907. 1907, 1910, somewhere around in there, is when they originally started out in a 2-story farm building that was in the same location as what they eventually built the St. Mary's brick building, right there, right in the middle of St. Mary's before you cross the Caskey Bridge on the east side. But that's where it was at. But it was in a 2-story farm building is when their district originally started out as a public school district. Bloomsdale started out, drawing a blank, but that original Bloomsdale Public School started out in the front, if you know where St. Agnes School is, and the on-ramp to 55, there's like a little parking lot that originally was out in front of the original church before the new church was built. There was a 1-room schoolhouse that was sitting in that parking lot. And I take that back. There was a subscription school that was up in actual Bloomsdale that was a subscription school that was in the upstairs of the Creamery in downtown Bloomsdale. Right above, well, the Creamery building was between the old Bank of Bloomsdale and where the post office was before they tore the post office down. The Creamery was in between those two buildings. And they went from there down to the parking lot in front of St. Agnes Church. And they were there for a while until they built the big 3-story rock building that's set where the current Bloomsdale KC Hall is where that, and that was not only a grade school, but that was also a high school. The first high school in Bloomsdale was down on Clement Road. For those of you locals that know where Clement Road is, the first high school in Bloomsdale was there, but eventually moved down to the Rock Building. And that was Bloomsdale School District, was one of the last schools in St. Genevieve County to actually shut down as a school district. And I believe my sister-in-law, I think, went freshman and sophomore to Bloomsdale Public High School there in Bloomsdale. And Bernadette tell me, 52, I think it was 1952 that Donna Lee moved in to St. Gen for her junior and senior year. So long about 1952 is when the whole Bloomsdale school thing was shut down. And a guy by the name of C.O. James was the principal at Bloomsdale School for a long, long time. And you could write a book about some of the things that C.O. James was into. But anyway, where am I? I back up, make sure I'm on schedule as far as timeline here. Eventually, as I said, the state of Missouri starts funding these local schools. And another couple things about one-room schoolhouses. The average size was about 16 by 24. There were no, as far as I know, and I don't know if Bob has ever come over any of them or not, but there were no little red schoolhouses. There was no red schoolhouses, little red schoolhouses. They were all, most of them were white. Most of them were just ship siding, painted white. And they were basically, the footprint was about 16 by 24 or 16 by 30, something along about that size. And they, you know, if you look at the pictures of the buildings, there's kind of a general pattern of how you built one-room schoolhouses. And these are a couple, the one right before here was a one-room schoolhouse on what we refer to in St. John as the Sugar Bottom Road, or Highway V, over by, right as you get into the big turn by Lurk Cabinet, okay? As you make that left-hand 90-degree turn, this here was one of the Bellevue school, and this is what it looks like today. And of course, like I said, it's been added on to, it's been re-roofed, re-sided, but this was one of the one-room schoolhouses out in the Bloomsdale area. And this is one that's in, the building itself is in fairly good shape still today. And this school was one of them that I was telling you about that basically had two different names. This school, and the name, as you can see on the front of it, was Fairview, but that school is also known as Bowyard. And this was probably the closest school district outside of the city of St. Genevieve. And this building is standing today, it's right in the middle of Mississippi Lime, of the planet Mississippi Lime. It's sitting up on the hill to the north as the road goes down through the main facility. And this was Fairview or Bowyard. And this was, this was the closest school. There was one down on Bourbon Road down close to locals, you all know where Lloyda's feed supply is on Bourbon Road, right before it comes on to 61. Well, right in that 90-degree turn, right on that corner, was Bourbon School. And I have a picture of Bourbon School up here. And that one, it's kind of a toss-up. No, that other one was the closest. Another close into the city of St. John was this one. And this was Kyle School. And it's sitting out on as you come in Sugar Bottom Road. I'm sure all of you travel that road every day. But as you come in Sugar Bottom Road and you make a 90-degree left turn on the Sugar Bottom Road, right before you get to the Kurtz's farms, okay? This was Kyle School, and this is what it looks like today, but underneath that nice new siding and this original school, and here again, got a picture of what that school looked like, the original school. And the pictures I've got up here, the reason why I didn't copy a lot of them, these are copies of pictures of pictures of pictures of pictures. So by the time you do it, to put them on a slide, they just kind of look like a gray lump and you don't see any details at all. This is one that was out on out near Cave Winery, out in that district or out in that neck of the woods. That was New Church, and as you can see, it was. They have restored it somewhat, but not near to like the one out at Lawrence. Of course, they didn't have the metal roof or the windows or the doors or anything, but the log structure that's there was part of New Church, the original school district that was out there. And as I said, the list that we'll give you, and if you want more information on exactly, there's a lot of rock foundation. Oh, that's the other thing about one-room schoolhouses. They all had a rock foundation. I don't know of any that actually had a poured concrete, foundation or footing or anything. It's all rock. And a lot of these rock foundations you can find out in the county today. In fact, we've got in some of our research, I've got a pictures of a lot of sites that I've gone to that are way out in the woods, that all that's left is a rock foundation, and the school is completely gone. This is one, and these little one-room schoolhouses are biting the dust just every year. Past year, this is one, Shady Grove, that was on Highway M, right before you go down the long hill, and it's Roger Greminger, where are you? It's almost right at the end of your driveway, isn't it? Almost. Right on top of the hill. It's gone. It was up until just sometime this past year, and they completely leveled it. But that was Shady Grove, and of course, then we get back to Lawrencetown School, and like I said, this is kind of the flagship of the one-room schoolhouses in St. John County, and this has been upkept. As I said, Persian Karen sitting over here all these years. How many years have you been painting that building and taking care of it?
30 years.
30 years. And he has restored the inside. He's got the chalkboards, the original type desk, the little pot metal stove in the middle. And this is really a neat, and hopefully it'll be there for a long time. And of course, all of you that's kept up with the reorganization of the Catholic Church's Lawrencetown Parish has been basically shut down. And this particular building is sitting on the church parking lot where you park today. And so hopefully something can be worked out to where it'll be there for many, many years. Mrs. Klaus, who is the third grade teacher at St. Agnes in Bloomsdale, every year she takes her third grade class out there, out there, and they all dress the part. They all wear the overalls and the bonnets and the stuff. They all take their lunch in a lunch pail, not a lunch box, not a Superman lunch box, but a lunch pail. And they all dress the part. And it just so happens that this just happened here about a month or so ago, that she took her third grade class out there and held class in that building. And as I said, the inside is all fixed up in the old desks and the benches and the potbelly stove. And she takes her third grade class out there and spends the whole day with the kids, teaching them reading, writing, and arithmetic. Is what they're taught. Just so happened that my great-grandson, who's sitting over there, he's in the third grade this year, and he was one of the kids that went out there and spent the day at Larston One-Room Schoolhouse. So, and I think, well, this is a picture talking about that area in that front parking lot. And 55 right now would be the trees that you see in the background to the right. 55 is right there. The on-ramp to 55 in Bluesdale is right there where those two trees are on the right. But that little one-room schoolhouse was sitting right there on the corner. And that was the Bloomsdale School District before they built the big one down where the KC Hall was. So they eventually moved into this 2.5 or 3-story rock building, which was down, and that building sets it did set right where the current KC Hall is in Bloomsdale, down Jersey Lane. And that was, as I said, one of the last of the rural school districts to shut down in St. Genevieve County in 1952 is when that actually shut down. St. Mary's, as I said, St. Mary's, there was the 2-story frame farm building that was sitting where they eventually built this school in St. Mary's along about 1911. They built this school in St. Mary's, and of course it was added on to several times. They added a big, not a big, but a gymnasium onto the back. To the left side they added a cafeteria and several more classrooms, and it was shut down, which is a whole nother story. I was on the school board, and it would have been 1977, when our school board went down and held almost an all-night meeting with a packed gym of St. Mary's people that wouldn't let us leave because we were closing their school down. And that would have been about 1976 is when St. Mary's School District, not school district, but the actual building was actually shut down. It was already part of St. John's School District, R2 School District, but that's when that building was actually shut down, and eventually that building was leveled. And it's a field now. Now, what I'm going to do is give to each of you, and wherever my help is, if you would give those out. We're going to give out a 2-page handout that gives the location on a map of, this is a 1936 map that was done by the superintendent, the county superintendent of schools was a guy by the name of Hilary Cairn. Some of you might know his son, Larry, that was out in Limekiln for a long time, or Georgia, and some of their kids. This was Larry's dad, that was the county superintendent for a long time. And they actually made a map, Rolla School of Mines made a road map of St. Genevieve County, but it also was a map that was shown by, verified by Hilary Cairn as being the exact location of about 50-something of what was then in operation of the local schools. Now, here's a real interesting, And if my eyes will hold out here, I'm going to read this. This is from a state report that was handed into the state of Missouri by the county superintendent in 1899. So almost, almost the turn of the century, I guess you could say. And I got to get over here in the light to read this, and I'm going to read you. It's kind of interesting. It really kind of shocked me when I read this. He says, and I'll read this right out of his report. There were 59 school districts in the county, and this is, here again, this is the state report in 1899, and it covered all these little outlying school districts. But it says that there were 59 school districts in the county and 60 school teachers in those 59 schools. And it gives a breakdown, and this I thought was kind of neat to know this. There were, as I said, 61 employees, and 5 of whom were colored and taught. I would guess most of them were either in the St. Mary's School District or they were in what then had become a colored school here in the city of St. John, or where First School is. That become a school, a public school for the colored for a number of years, and I'm sure that's where the 5 black teachers were. They make a big issue of segregation and stuff back then, and I'll read on further here. And they say where is it? Okay, in the schools, I lost my place because I want to get this right. Okay, there was 3,535 males in the, I'm sorry, 3,535 students in St. Genevieve in all these school districts in 1899, of which 1,051 were white males and 905 were white females. And there were 147 black students, not black, but colored students of both sexes. And it goes on to say that the estimate of the total value of schools in St. Genevieve County, the total estimate of the property or the value of the schools, all of these in St. Genevieve County in 1899, was $27,000. And that was all the 40-acre properties and the schoolhouses and all the equipment and everything was $27,000 for the whole county of St. Genevieve. What I just handed out, and I think, yeah, there should have been plenty of copies, is 2 things. One of them is a sheet that is a map of the county, that county map of 1936, that Hillary Karen verified the location. This right here, and it's kind of hard to see, and you'll probably need a magnifying glass to read yours, but you'll see all these little circles, and that's where all of those one-room schoolhouses was located all over the county. And you can those numbers that are in those little circles is coded back to your sheet, your first sheet, that lists all of the schools in alphabetical order, and whatever number that school district has in front of it is coded to that map. Now, if you're interested in really getting down to brass tacks, you'll, as I said, we can actually give you about the GPS location, and you know how accurate some of them can be, right down to within a foot or closer of exactly where these school buildings were. Some of them may be in some of your backyards that you don't realize just where they're at. But if you look at that map and you look at the big one I have on the chart up here, and please come up, and I have highlighted all of those school districts in red to where if you did it mechanically or measuring it, you couldn't have spread all of those 60 school districts out any more leveled, you know. And of course, number one, they were all near a county road. May have been a dirt road back at that time, but when they were built, they were all near a road, and they all had some type of a water source. Along with the rock foundation, most of them had cisterns. They drank cistern water, and they all had a pot-belly stove. And the 8th graders, correct me if I'm wrong, Pershing, the 8th graders or the older kids, they had to split wood and keep the furnace or the stove in the middle of the school going during the winter. And of course, they did not have inside plumbing. And they all drank out of a common bucket of water that was taken from the cistern. I'm sure the health department wouldn't have been too happy with them but they all drank from a ladle or a 1 cup out of a bucket of water. But that was their water. It comes from a cistern or maybe a nearby spring or a creek that would have been near to these little one-room schoolhouses. There is, every one of these one-room schoolhouses all have a separate story, and you could probably spend a whole hour talking about each one. Just a couple of them that come to mind that I found real interesting. One, the Asylum, which was actually a subscription school, but a couple other ones. Morning Sun School, which if you know where the current, and I'm going to call it Stoptown instead of River X Falls, where the church is at Stoptown, if you go down on and I believe it's referred to as Weingarten Road, that goes from Stoptown over to Weingarten, right below, on that road, right down below the present Catholic church that was there at the time, was a one-room schoolhouse, and it was called Morning Sun. Okay? Well, as I said, there was a 3-man board of trustees that was over that school district of Morning Sun, and that particular trustee had several kids that were walking like 3-4 miles a day to get to school. Now these were little kids, you know, these were 5, 6, 7-year-old that were walking 3-4 miles to school each day. So, and I'm not going to mention any names, but his name is in the paper and stuff. But he decided one night, one rainy night, he burnt the schoolhouse down. He actually burnt the schoolhouse down, and they tracked him in the mud back to his house, which was like 3-4 miles away. And the sheriff's department, of course, it was arson. You know, they knew, hey, somebody burnt the schoolhouse down. And they went to him and said, hey, what gives? And he says, well, this isn't right. The kids that all go to that school, they all live over where I live, 3-4 miles away. So I figure, well, I'll burn the schoolhouse down, and maybe they'll move and build a new schoolhouse over closer to where all these kids are living. And they did that. They actually built a new Morning Sun School, and that new schoolhouse was built over, for those of you that know B Road, right before you cross the bridge coming into Stoptown, and where Eisenbeiss Road cuts off of B Road, right there at the intersection is where they built the new Morning Sun School. And he was never prosecuted, he was never fined, and they built him a new schoolhouse, more or less in his backyard. But as I said, there's stories like this. Morning Glade, the school that was actually on McCarran property out in Bloomsdale, when it was decommissioned as a school district, I forget the Karen's name, but he actually moved that whole schoolhouse. And, you know, it wasn't that big, but it was the typical size of a one-room. They actually moved that schoolhouse about a mile or so through the woods on logs and oxen that actually dragged that schoolhouse over to the property that the Fun Farm is actually on in Bloomsdale. For those of you that know, that's actually where that little schoolhouse ended up at after being pulled on logs and oxen over to that. And this particular Karen, and maybe you know the name, Pershing of the Karen.
Lex Karen?
Lex, was it Lex Karen? Okay, that actually lived in that house then for a number of years. That was another schoolhouse that just bit the dust this past year, is the Fun Farm. The people that own that actually tore that schoolhouse down. But as I said, there's individual stories. Morning Shade, the one that was out on M Road, those people, every year until I think it was sometime in the 1980s, every year they would get, every 5 years they would get together and have a class reunion. And there's 2 binders up here of pictures of those students from Morning Shade. And of course, these people are all in their, you know, the last few years of when they were taking pictures and having class reunions. These people were all in their 80s and 90 years old and so forth. But they took a lot of pictures and had a lot of fun and had a big meal and everything. But Morning Shade, eventually, I don't know if there's any of them still alive that attended Morning Shade. But anyway, we ended up with their binders and so forth. So the museum also has a copy of the state report, which I read you about the populations and stuff. The state report, each school district had a separate or a special format of their report that they had to turn in each year. And this had like the teacher's contract and so forth in these books. And this was from, I ended up, somebody in the courthouse, when they knew I was working on this, they said, hey, you know, we've got some of these downstairs. Does the museum, or do you want them? And I said, yeah, I'll take them. And it is the minutes of their trustees meetings, it's their contracts with their teachers, and it's where every penny was spent. And keep in mind, when I say they all got local tax money, and if you look at these from some of the years, the typical local for the year, the total tax money that they would receive would be $200-300. And of course, a little bit different these days when it's 7 or 8 million that R2 spends in a year. But as I said, there's a lot of individual stories that just too numerous to mention about these. One thing about the list that you have there, any of the names of the school districts that have a red dot in front of them, okay, that indicates that I have, Bob and I have historical something, other information on that particular school district. It may only be a picture, it may be just a paragraph, and it may be as much as 7 or 8 pages of information on that particular school district. So, and any of them that don't have a red dot, and any of them that you may know somebody or some other information on that, please clue us in. We'd love to have more information on all 60-something school districts that were considered. Oh, another interesting story that just come to mind is in that Zell school. Remember that it was the first school district outside of the city limits of St. Genevieve. Zell, 1847, okay? The teachers that showed up each year on in the local newspaper as far as who that teacher was for that particular year in that school, the teachers that were in that school in Zell were Catholic nuns, which that would be interesting today, wouldn't it, to have nuns teaching in the public schools? Yeah. But yeah, and of course, they were also teaching, and I take it at that time, 1847, that there was a number of nuns that would have been teaching or would have had a convent there in Zell, and a couple of those nuns were hired by the public school district as the teacher for that school that you saw a while ago. And as I said, there's just so many different stories about all these schools, and the names of some of these schools as you go down the list are really, Morning Glory and just the names. Don't know, who would come up with them. In a lot of cases, it was the property owners that may have owned that property. And in other cases, it was, there's a lot of just, when you think about it in St. Genevieve today, if you look at a current map of St. Genevieve County, there are a lot of our county roads that are named after the school that was on that county road. Jackson School Road out around Bloomsdale, Concord School Road north of Bloomsdale, Burke School Road out Weingarten, out 32, Smith Road, Smith School Road, and they're all, roads today in St. Genevieve County that were named after the school that was sometime located on that road. At this point, I would encourage you, if you have any questions. As I said, the ones with red dots, we have more information on, and about 50 of those we can give you the exact GPS location. And it may be that you built your new house on top of one of them. But yeah, if you look at the map that you have, and with a magnifying glass, I'm sure, or come up and look at this, it's perfectly separated. If you start drawing 5-mile diameter circles all over the whole county of St. Genevieve, you couldn't have done a better job as far as locating all these one-room schoolhouses. Questions? Yes, sir.
How did they determine where to put a school? Wasn't that by how many sections or so many schools in a town?
It ended up, and I've read somewhere in the state school record, that it ended up that each, and you have townships that are also in your county. It ended up just not by, I don't think by anything official, but it ended up that each township in the county ended up with a school somewhere in that township. It just worked out that way. Yep.
In other words, a township is a mile square, so that was the gauge of distance they had to walk.
Well, these schools, if you look at this map up here, they're more than, I'd say if you started with a scale and a compass and actually started with the scale of the map, these schools are all going to be located at least 5 miles apart. Yep. Which means that they could have been walking, 2.5 miles or something as far as where they live. Yep. Sir?
What is the R2 school district?
Okay, the R, like today, you have R2, and the R stands for reorganized. Okay? So the St. Genevieve School District has been in 2 different reorganizations. Okay? And of course, the second, or R2, the second reorganization would have been the biggie when they actually took in Kaufman and those. The one before that would have been when it went from 5 school districts, down, went from 60-something down to 5. And then the second one, or R2, would have been the second reorganization of that. And you'll see some other, it's a good example. Oh, R7, which is just north of St. Genevieve County, up around, south of Festus. So, but R7, that school district has been reorganized as far as the boundaries of that school district has been reorganized 7 times. Yep. And I think Farmington is Farmington R6 is one of the school districts that are around us Farmington School District, actually, there are St. Genevieve County properties that are actually in Farmington School District. My daughter lives out 32, and she's in St. Genevieve County, but she's actually in the Farmington School District. And the same happens to the north, to where up in that northwest corner of St. Genevieve County, you have people that live in St. Genevieve County, but they're actually in R7 school district. Yep.
Two things, Bob. One of them, the teachers did not have automobiles. They
No.
boarded with individual families.
Good point, yeah. The teachers in a lot of these rural schools, since most of the teachers were teachers that had somewhere along the line had more than just 8 grades of education, probably high school, but I don't think there's too many of them that had more than a high school education, maybe some college, but very few of them were college degree teachers. And because where they come from, let's say it was a teacher that actually was born and raised and got their education here in St. Genevieve, but they actually taught in one of the rural schools out in Weingarten. Okay? There's a lot of instances where those teachers would actually stay with one of the families of the kids that they were teaching. The state required of these school districts that they would be in session at least 6 months of the year, or a 6-month total, not a semester, but a total year of education was 6 months. Oh, the other interesting thing about these rural schools is they alternated the years that you were in school every other year. So 1 year, those teachers of 8 grades, 1 year they would be teaching 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 7th. The next year, they would be preparing classwork for the 2nd, 4th, 6th, and 8th graders. So the teachers, not every year, were preparing their class work for all 8 years. And you got to remember that the average enrollment in these rural schools was between 12 and 15 students. So there might have been several of your students that there were years that you didn't have any particular students that fell in that particular age group. So there may be some years that you would only have 2nd graders and 6th graders. That there were no kids that would fall into that thing. Now, the interesting part about that is if you started school when you were 5 or 6 or whatever it was back then, maybe 7, if you started school on the year that they were teaching 2nd, 4th, 6th, and 8th grade, you could actually go through your 8 grades of grade school in 7 years. If you think about it. That, where they started out, actually not as a first grader, but they started out as a 2nd grader. So it was, that was one of the, I guess, as far as the teachers, yeah, they weren't preparing, their classwork and stuff for 8th grades. It was 4 or less.
The 7th and 8th grade kids would work with like the first graders, second graders, third graders with arithmetic and spelling.
So they were tutoring. I don't know if everybody could hear what Pershing was saying, but your 7th and 8th graders would always help teach your 1st and your 2nd graders their ABCs and their numbers and so forth. That they actually took part in the actual teaching of the lower age kids. Yeah.
And I would be happy to open the school at any time that anybody wants to come out to Lawrencetown to see the Lone School. We live right next door.
Yeah. They live on the other side of the church in a brick home.
We're happy to open it at any time. If you want to bring food, simply just let us know. If we're at home, which most of the time now we are, we'll be happy to do that and happy to open it for anybody that wants to stop and see everybody.
There you go. Yep. You want to go back 150 years and see what it was like? Go to Lawrencetown. Everybody, I assume everybody here knows where Lawrencetown Church is or where Lawrencetown's at. Yep. There was a hand up there.
I'm curious, were mainly women teachers or were they men? I know that people in the 90s now have told me that when they were married, they were no longer allowed to teach.
There were several male teachers that taught in the grade schools back in that, as I said, the golden age of one room was 1850 to 1950. But in those schools, like Hogemeller School, Joseph Hogemeller, I don't know, and maybe there was other teachers that was at Hogemeller School, but I'm sure he didn't teach at Hogemeller School for 100 years. That's a big retirement program, yeah. Sir?
How much uniformity of curriculum was there across all these districts?
Basically, from the state, that, and here again, remember Professor Hedrick from the asylum, basically drew up the original curriculum, and as you might imagine, it was reading, writing, and arithmetic. And if it was a bigger school district that had more money to spend because of the property tax or whatever, the other subjects that may be brought in besides the 3 basics would have been geography, would have been one, and public speaking, which that surprised me. Well, those senators from the asylum, I guess they cashed in on that. Yeah.
So is the books for the curriculum acquired very centrally by the trustees of the district?
Yes. Yep.
Distributed all.
It was like school districts are supposed to be, where they're under the control of the local school board. Today we call them school boards. Back then they were trustees. Yeah. Yep. A lot of what was taught in the individual schools was taught. It was because of the locale of where they were at. Yep. Yep. The one that surprised me was the 1878 brick school here in St. Jim that had that first kindergarten that they emphasized in one of they actually would run, because this was actually tuition supported, the kindergarten. It was not a state supported, tax supported school at that time. kindergarten wasn't. And in fact, God, I don't remember when like R2 here, you paid to go to kindergarten, just like today they pay for preschool. That's not tax supported, even though they just built a new super big complex for the preschool here in St. John. But those kids that go to preschool actually pay a tuition for that. Yeah. But back then, it was the kindergarten. They actually would run, and I have a copy of one of the ads that they run in the local newspaper. I don't know if it's the Herald or the Fairplay, of where they were advertising the kindergarten that was in the basement of that brick building that was down on Market and 2nd Street, right on the corner there. Well, it was, Bank St. Genevieve was there, and now it's the Museum for Colonial History is on that corner. Okay? Sir?
The teachers, generally speaking, did not have automobiles
Oh.
themselves. They boarded with,
Families of their students, yeah.
so that was an interesting factor.
Yep.
This lady asked if they had only male teachers, but they did have female teachers because my husband went to the one out on Sugar Bottom Road,
Uh-huh.
and Camille DuPont was his teacher.
Uh-huh.
And she taught out there for years.
Yep.
And
She
there
was
were-
there for a long time.
Right, and there were, when my mom went to school, their teacher, she was a lady also, and she stayed with them.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. There were, as I said, there were a number of some of the histories that we found on some of the, there were a number of men that did teach in these rural schools, but 90% of them were probably all young women, yes. Yep. Any other? Yes, sir?
You mentioned that the state mandated that there had to be 6 months of education during the year.
Yes, that was
Now,
the school term.
typically, did they break that up into blocks because of planting season, harvest season, things like that?
I don't know, and that was probably left up to the local trustees as far as what time of the year school would start. Would it be in September, and would they be out in May, or was there like a split session? I don't know, Bob, did you ever get any indication of actually, was there a specific time of the year that they had to be in session? Yeah, I don't ever remember seeing anything.
So that might have been at the discretion of each individual district.
Could have been, yeah. As long as they got their 6 months of classes. When I was principal at St. John, the state required that you had to have 184 days in session. And an in-session day now, I know because I got grandkids, if you still have classes up until like noon, that is considered a full day that could be counted towards what the state required. But it was, like I said, I'm thinking back in 1980s when I was a principal. I know for a fact that was 184 days, and you had to lay out your school calendar, taking into consideration, like the holidays and so forth. You had to, and teachers, well, they didn't have as many teachers meetings as what they have now, but taking it all in to what day school would start and what day it would end. Used to always be that school would start the week after Labor Day. Well, now, hell, they start in the middle of August now.
You had to count by minutes also, didn't you?
And that has to do, I guess, with, like I said, Glenn, today I know if you're still, you gotta have session at least until like 11:30 in order to count it for a day of school.
Now, you mentioned the parts south of where I grew up, they had cotton vacation.
Yeah.
So they started in August. You got about 3 weeks of cotton vacation.
For cotton picking. Down Boot Hill? Almost, okay. Any other questions? Well, please come up and look at the stuff that we've got up here. I'll be around, Bob will be around to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Your kids on. Hey, thank you all for coming. We'd like to thank again our sponsor for tonight, HSB Advisors, and invite all of you to buy a raffle ticket or check out the Missouri, Illinois books that are in front there. And the author, Carl Johnson, will be signing those books